Hey, I'm Penn Badgley.
And I'm Victoria Pedretti.
And we're the stars of the Netflix series You.
Before you watch season 3, we wanted to give a quick rundown of everything that has happened so far. So, here we go. The show follows a guy named Joe.
Sweet guy, played by me.
Played by Penn, who works in a bookstore in New York City that's owned by an old man named Mr. Mooney.
Guilty. Can I help you find something?
And Joe likes to think of himself as a chivalrous, old-school romantic, but really, he's just, he's a creep.
Yeah, so when a woman named Guinevere Beck comes in to buy a book that Joe happens to like himself, he becomes completely and utterly obsessed with her, like head over heels in love.
Okay, I'm going for it.
Good, you won't regret it.
Now, let's be honest. Beck is a little messy right now, but Joe is in love regardless. It's more about who he imagines Beck to be.
Just go home and get caught up.
Bad news, beautiful Beck has a boyfriend, a total dick named Benji. And I should have mentioned earlier that Joe is, he's kind of a serial killer.
He's absolutely a serial killer. He has a cage and everything. And since Benji is a big problem for Joe, he kidnaps Benji, holds him in the cage, and poisons him.
Confession? I have no idea what to do with him now.
Let's not forget about Peach, who Joe also kills. And you don't really get the vibe that these are Joe's first murders either.
Oh yeah. Beck's best friend Peach is in love with her and about to whisk her off to Paris, where Joe notably does not live, so Joe kills Peach also.
It actually takes a few tries. First, Joe tries clobbering her over the head with a big rock, but that doesn't take.
So he finishes the job by shooting Peach and staging the whole thing as a suicide. This guy's great.
Yeah, he's dating Beck and it's going great. I mean, he saves her from a speeding train, he romances her, he makes her pancakes.
We should also mention Dr. Nicky, Beck's therapist. He's also sleeping with Beck.
And Joe finds out about this, and he keeps that to himself. Turns out he has a different plan for the doc.
Anyways, at some point during their courtship, Beck becomes suspicious of Joe and starts looking into the disappearance of his ex, Candace.
You must sleep deeper than I do. What he did to me, one of these days he's gonna do to you, or worse.
Eventually, she discovers a special little box in Joe's apartment. You know, the type of box you keep old letters in.
Except this is Joe that we're talking about. So the box is full of, it's full of creepy things like his girlfriend's jewelry, some stolen underwear, pretty standard serial killer stuff.
Yeah, so obviously the jig is totally up, and Joe has to take Beck into the basement of the bookstore and lock her up in his creepy cage.
Joe! Joe!
And eventually, he kills her. It's the love of his life. It is brutal.
I didn't want it to be like this, Beck.
This presents Joe with a problem. What do you do with the dead girlfriend? People know they dated, and the boyfriend is always the first suspect.
Joe is nothing if not resourceful. He devises a way to pin all of this on Dr. Nicky. You see, he did have a plan for him.
Joe eventually publishes Beck's unpublished manuscript and returns to his quiet single life, working in the bookstore.
Except in the final moments of the season 1 finale, this mysterious person, a woman, walks into the bookstore. It turns out to be Candace, Joe's ex-girlfriend, who we were all pretty sure was dead.
What a cliffhanger! Well, let's not hang on that cliff too long. Here we go with season 2. Season 2 begins with Joe in his literal hell, Los Angeles.
So after he runs into Candace at the end of season 1, who, you know, turns out is pretty pissed at him for trying to kill her, Joe runs away to start a new life and manage his addiction as best as he can.
Yeah, you know, only 10 minutes per day of stalking, normal stuff.
Joe changes his name to Will Bettelheim and gets a job in the bookstore section of a grocery store. And it's there that he meets a woman named Love.
Played by me.
Bell peppers can be extremely vaginal depending on how you cut them.
But it turns out that Joe is actually up to his old tricks again. Turns out it wasn't a coincidence that he ran into Love at all. He was stalking her, and he's got the real Will Bettelheim locked up in a cage.
Old habits die hard.
And new problems are mounting for our Joe. The person he stole his identity from, Will, actually owes this guy named Jasper $50,000. So Jasper cuts off Joe's finger to show him he means business.
Hi, no, it's an accident at work.
To deal with this situation, Joe has to lie to Love about missing their date. It's just a big web of lies, and the romance has barely started.
True to form, Joe he lures Jasper into the storage unit where he's keeping Will locked up. And he quickly kills Jasper, cuts his body up. It's pretty gross.
Well, yeah, he chops up a body. Not a lot of ungross ways to pull that off.
Either way, Joe tells Love that he can't love anymore after his last relationship, and they agree to be just friends, but Love is quite determined to break down his walls.
So while the two go about their awkward friendship, Joe meets her brother 40, and through his improv group, he meets a guy named Hendy, a famous comedian who is notoriously predatory with young girls.
Joe decides having this creep in his life even peripherally is probably not a great idea. He decides to infiltrate his circle and attends a party with 40 to get closer to Hendy.
This leads to Joe driving a very drunk 40 home for the evening, which of course leads to him and Love hooking up. But we can't forget about the creepy comedian who is currently trying to take advantage of Joe's 15-year-old neighbor, Ellie.
Realizing Ellie is in danger, Joe rushes to Hendy's house just before this guy is attempting anything with her, and Joe drugs him.
And then carts him off to Hendy's super creepy basement.
Once again, Joe finds himself in another basement, killing another person. Hey. He cleans up the scene and heads out to meet Love and 40. And wouldn't you know it, they're with Candace. And she's also changed her name to Amy.
I know he's a serial killer, but goddamn, Joe can't catch a break, can he? Not to mention Will is still in the storage unit.
So anyway, 40 is now dating Candace, aka Amy, who tells Joe that she's only there to protect Love and 40 from him.
Want to know how I found you?
I would love to hear.
Well, sure enough, Candace gets really intense about Joe because, well, obviously. And Joe decides it's time to be done with her.
But before he can solve the situation, Candace shows up and spills everything to Love. Photographic proof and all.
He attacked me and almost killed me.
He what?
So Love and Joe break up. But at least it's a breakup that doesn't involve a murder. Love immediately starts hooking up with some Australian guy named Milo, and Joe begins a casual relationship with his neighbor, Delilah.
That is, of course, until she has her cop friend look into Joe, which changes things for Delilah.
Joe decides he's not going to kill Delilah, but he needs a day to get things together so he can leave the country.
But before he can do any preparation for fleeing town, Joe and 40 are kidnapped. It turns out that this was all at 40's request. He wants them to finish their screenplay and felt that that would help the dramatic process.
We maybe use a more breathable hood next time.
But 40 being 40, he also doses Joe with a big hit of acid, and a heavily tripping Joe ends up killing Delilah anyway. Yeah, and while he is cleaning up the mess, murder is very messy as it turns out. Who happens to show up, but Candace, who locks Joe in the cage and calls Love to the scene where Joe confesses.
So get this, Love believes Candace, but she's not upset with Joe. She murders Candace. Plot twist, Love is a serial killer too. And she's pregnant with Joe's kid.
Joe, regretting his own terrible childhood, decides to stay in LA to raise the child and be a good father. Well, until in the final scene we see Joe catch a lustful look at yet another new neighbor. Same old Joe.
This is where I had to be to meet you.
So that's it for our quick recap. Make sure to check out season 3 on Netflix.